Hi, welcome back everybody. Did you have a nice lunch break?
Thank you.
It's warm in the sun now. Nice and cool in here. This talk is on the shorter side, I think. Welcome back to people online as well. This is Shakespeare and Spirituality. So we've been thinking about how to characterise Shakespeare's use of the Bible and realising that that's difficult to do. Spirituality is obviously an enormous term and is also difficult to characterise. So this is just one way of how I've set about trying to do this. And I really begin with four examples from the canon, one of which you've already heard. The frail and confused old King Lear, whose country is torn apart by war, enters carrying the body of his favourite daughter. Howl, oh, you are men of stones. Had I your tongues and eyes, I'd use them so that heaven's vault should crack. An exiled duke commends living in the forest of Arden rather than the royal court. This our life, exempt from public haunt, finds tongues in trees, books in the running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything. Princess Imogen, she's cropped up in all three talks, has just awoken next to the headless corpse whom she believes to be her husband, and prays, "Good faith, I tremble still with fear, but if there be yet left in heaven as small a drop of pity as a wren's eye, feared gods, a part of it." Hamlet confides in Horatio just moments before the duel that will bring his death. There is special providence in the fall of a sparrow. If it be now, 'tis not to come. If it be not to come, it will be now. If it be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all. Since no man knows aught of what he leaves, what is to leave betimes. Let be. These four examples enable different ways of thinking about spirituality in Shakespeare. King Lear's relationship with the gods is one of anger and despair. Duke Senior and Imogen find the infinite and the divine in the natural world. Trees, stones, the running brooks, and something as small and specific as a wren's eye. As Edith Sitwell observes, Shakespeare knew that there is no fragment of clay, however little worth, that is not entirely composed of inexplicable qualities. Isn't that marvellous observation, opinion? In the examples from As You Like It and Cymbeline, Shakespeare presents the natural world through the lens of the incarnation, the central belief of Christianity. Everything in nature can reveal the presence of the divine because God becomes flesh and interacts with God's world, drawing everything to God through the person and spirit of Jesus. In the fourth example from Hamlet, Shakespeare's referring to the natural world coincides with Matthew's Gospel to convey Hamlet's feelings. A sparrow, again, are not two sparrows sold for a farthing, and one of them shall not fall on the ground without your Father. Shakespeare, as we heard this morning, refers to the Bible who knows how many times, more than 11,160. And as a resource for him, it gives some sort of creative energy to the moment, like an electrical charge. From a theological perspective, I'd say that Hamlet's speech, and we've heard it twice now, is one of Shakespeare's best articulations of grace, both in content and phrasing. There is an acceptance and resignation in the shape and structure of Shakespeare's language, as well as in a quiet, confident and calm affirmation of a universal truth and question. The truth is that we shall all die. The question is, how ready will we be when the time comes? Hamlet's trust in God, whom he does not need to name because of the obvious allusion to Matthew's Gospel, suggests a self which, for all of its struggles so far, now sits calmly within an accepted sense of justice. Let be. Hamlet's is a detached, holy, and graceful perspective. In seeking to try and characterize Shakespeare's spirituality through his work, there now follow two definitions of spirituality, one literary and one theological. The first is by C.S. Lewis, and it comes at the very end of his book, An Experiment in Criticism, a literary book. Those of us who have been true readers all our life seldom fully realise the enormous extension of our being which we owe to authors. The man who is contented to be himself, and therefore lesser self, is in prison. My own eyes are not enough for me. I will see through those of others. Reality, even seen through the eyes of many, is not enough. I will see what others have invented. Even the eyes of all humanity are not enough. Very gladly would I learn what face things present to a mouse or a bee. More gladly still would I perceive the olfactory world charged with all the information and emotion it carries for a dog. Literary experience heals the wound without undermining the privilege of individuality. In reading great literature, I become 1,000 men and yet remain myself. Like the night sky in the Greek poem, I see with a myriad eyes, but it is still I who see. Here, as in worship, in love, in moral action, and in knowing, I transcend myself, and am never more myself than when I do. It's a marvellous conclusion to his book, and I'm using it as a definition of spirituality because it relates closely to the world of the imagination and how and why we seek, as readers, to take upon us the perspective of others, empathy. Every kind of spirituality, like the best kind of reading, requires empathy. It's through empathy, suggests Lewis, that we can experience self-transcendence. The second definition is by Rowan Williams. They were both at Magdalen College, Cambridge. That's another connection. Spirituality is far more than a science of interpreting exceptional private experiences. It must now touch every area of human experience, the public and social, the painful, negative, even pathological byways of the mind, the moral and relational world. For Rowan Williams, spirituality is about who we are as people, morally, psychologically, socially, and experientially. His definition seeks to embrace all kinds of human experience, just as all experiences are available for portrayal by a writer or actor. It's often said of Shakespeare that all of human experience can be found in his works, and all aspects of life, feeling, and human action can provide an access to an understanding of a person's spirituality. If we apply Lewis and Williams's definitions of spirituality to Shakespeare, then we find we have arrived at a place of radical inclusivity, in which nothing is out of bounds, a place of abundance and generosity and openness. Shakespeare's spirituality is radically inclusive. So I want to think, therefore, a little bit about the creative imagination in relation to things incarnational. The power of the creative imagination is one expression of a person's spirituality is described in the following way by Dorothy L. Sayers, a friend of C.S. Lewis, writing in 1941. What happens in a writer's mind is something like this. When making a character, he, in a manner of speaking, separates and incarnates a part of his own living mind. He recognizes in himself a powerful emotion, let's say jealousy. His activity then takes this form. Supposing this emotion were to become so strong as to dominate my whole personality, how should I feel and how should I behave? In imagination, he becomes the jealous person and thinks and feels within that frame of experience. So that the jealousy of Othello is the true creative expression of the jealousy of Shakespeare. Or perhaps it would be more in accordance with reality to say that all these characters are Shakespeare, externalizations of some part of the writer's self and self-experience. Her description, far from making crude, transparent biographical claims from Shakespeare's work, is really about how a writer's creative output can be regarded as part of his or her spirituality. George Steiner's perspective also finds divine potential in the aesthetic encounter. Art, literature, and music for Steiner are no less than a wager on transcendence. He cites several examples of artists describing the creative act as being like a religious experience. So he cites D.H. Lawrence, and I'll do my D.H. Lawrence voice for you. I always feel as if I stood naked for the fire of Almighty God to go through me, and it's rather an awful feeling. One has to be so terribly religious to be an artist. And then there is Yeats, writes Steiner. I can't do Yeats. No man can create as Shakespeare, Homer, Sophocles, who does not believe with all his blood and nerve that man's soul is immortal. To engage with Shakespeare's imagination through his work is to be engaged from an incarnational perspective with his spirituality. In describing spirituality in relation to the poetic imagination, L. William Countryman observes that every human individual also has a uniqueness, a particular experience, a particular perspective, a particular will and memory, a particular way of performing the common human realities that no other being shares in exactly the same way. In that concrete particularity, spirituality works its work. And from this perspective, I arrive at George Herbert's sonnet called Prayer. which is that list of things. There's no verb in the poem. It's just a list of things defining prayer. And one of his phrases is heaven in ordinary. Now he means ordinary in the sense of an ordinary you might go and have a meal in, like a tavern. They were called ordinaries in Shakespeare and Herbert's time, as well as taverns and pubs. But also heaven in the ordinary, in the everyday, particularized experiences that we all have. So Shakespeare is fascinated by the particularity of the everyday, what one might recognize as God in the ordinariness and apparent smallness of human existence and in the natural world. Of particular note are Shakespeare's descriptions of the natural world, of which I think somebody counted recently in a study about 19,000 references to some aspects of the natural world in Shakespeare's plays. His naming of individual flowers, for example, expressions of deep emotion, invocations of absolute truths, moments of crises, revelation, joy, descriptions of the imagination, the power of storytelling and the theatrical, and any moment when one perceives a heightening of the ordinary through a celebration of the particular. And as a dramatist, he's wanting, of course, the voices of his characters, I suppose, to be as particular and as original to that character as possible. These examples illustrate how Shakespeare's spirituality can be understood as being incarnational, if one wants to use an adjective for it. The very act of bodying forth actors and characters on stage shows a commitment to the particularity of live, actual presence in real time. To understand and characterize Shakespeare's spirituality from an incarnational perspective is no less than to realize, in the words of Jesus himself, that the kingdom of God is within you. From a spiritual perspective, Shakespeare's imagination is expressed through his work, is one way of illustrating and engaging with that kingdom from within Shakespeare. So thinking about Shakespeare's bodying forth, as it were, incarnation, the made into flesh. At the beginning of Act 5 of A Midsummer Night's Dream, Duke Theseus describes the poet's imagination in a way which makes it sound like Shakespeare's own artistic creed. The poet's eye, in a fine frenzy rolling, doth glance from heaven to earth, from earth to heaven, and as imagination bodies forth the forms of things unknown, the poet's pen turns them into shapes and gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name. Such tricks hath strong imagination, that if it would but apprehend some joy, it comprehends some bringer of that joy, or in the night, imagining some fear. How easy is a bush supposed a bear? The tip of the poet's quill, writes Shakespeare, is where the writer's imagination turns things invisible into things visible. Words, local habitations, and names are given shape, existence, incarnated, eventually to be bodied forth in live action on stage. Imagination, the natural world, human experience, time, faith, and spiritual truths all combine to make The Winter's Tale a special focus for the present purposes for the exploration and illustration of Shakespeare's spirituality. Do you all know The Winter's Tale? Have you heard of it? Hands up if you've seen it or read it. And hands up if it's just like a new play to you right now. So most of you have, but some of you haven't. Well, for those of you who haven't, this isn't a spoiler alert. it's a straightforward spoiler. It's one of my favourite Shakespeare plays, but I can't read what I'm about to read without removing the surprise ending. But the point I'm making is the surprise ending, as you'll hear. Now, Shakespeare is a great writer about forgiveness, and a late friend of mine undertook for her PhD forgiveness in Shakespeare's plays. And one of her really interesting insights was that of all of his contemporaries, he's the only one actually writing about forgiveness in the way that he does. So it's a very unusual theme within the period, and Shakespeare's writing about forgiveness often. As much as he dramatises forgiveness, there are characters who refuse it, as well as those who are unable to give it. Malvolio, in Twelfth Night, or What You Will, seems never to forgive those who've gulled him. His final line is bitter as well as pathetic. I'll be revenged on the whole pack of you. That word pack, that plosive noun, really illustrates the unrelenting nature of Malvolio's non-forgiveness. Only interested in revenge, he sees them more like a pack of dogs or wolves by whom he's been attacked. The Tempest can be read as a journey towards forgiveness, as the magician Prospero gathers together a reunion of the Neapolitan court in order to forgive them for usurping him from his dukedom 12 years earlier. But his project initially, of course, was revenge, and it's his servant Ariel who changes his mind. There's the moment in Act 5 when Ariel says to Prospero, Ariel expresses empathy and says to Prospero, my feelings would be like would be forgiving feelings if I were human. Ariel's a non-human. So Ariel's imagining being human and therefore being able to forgive those who wronged Prospero if he were Prospero, and that changes Prospero's mind. So he decides he's going to forgive them rather than somehow punish them, we suppose, was his original project. But his brother Antonio is part of this court who turns up to be forgiven and doesn't want forgiveness. And he says, I feel not this deity in my bosom. And he remains stonily silent in the face of forgiveness. So the best we can say is he's silent, but it looks like he's not wanting to be forgiven. A silence that can achieve its maximum effect only in live performance. Forgiveness, which should not be confused with either pardon or mercy, shines most impressively in The Winter's Tale. Late play, this encompasses destructive jealousy, the betrayal of friendship, attempted murder, the intervention of divine justice, the death of a young prince and his mother, the queen, a bear coming onto the stage to chase away and eat a courtier, exit pursued by bear, a pastoral world in which we see a new love recreated and the reunion of a royal family, and time. 16 years intervene between the end of Act 3 and the beginning of Act 4, when a personification of time itself tells the audience what's been happening during those 16 years. The actors who appear in both parts of the play must look, I suppose, and behave 16 years older in Acts 4 and 5. The Winter's Tale, as its title suggests, is partly about human beings survive coldness and suffering and arrive at the coming of spring and new life. But Queen Hermione, whom we thought had died, is not really dead. She only appeared to have died of shock on hearing about the death of her son, Prince Mamilius, who is really dead. For 16 years, her husband, King Leontes, whose jealousy led to his condemning her, has been mourning, racked with guilt, believing that their new daughter, to be begotten by his friend King Polixenes, Leontes had the baby sent away 16 years ago. Hermione has been hidden and looked after by Paulina. In Act 5, the lost princess, who's called Perdita, which means the lost one, returns to meet her father, the father she's never known, along with her husband-to-be, Prince Florizel, who is the son of the other king, whom Leontes thought had impregnated his wife, the son of Polixenes. In the final moments, Paulina presents a statue of the queen to King Leontes, King Polixenes, Princess Perdita, Princess Florizel, Prince Florizel, the courtiers and their friends. Everyone is captivated with the artistry of the statue and astonished at how lifelike it appears. Paulina says that she can make it move. It is required you do awake your faith, then all stand still. All those that think it is unlawful business I am about, let them depart. Proceed. No foot shall stir. Music, awake her. Strike. 'Tis time. Descend. Bestow no more. Approach. Strike all that look upon with marvel. Come, I'll fill your grave up. Stir. Nay, come away. Bequeath to death your numbness, for from him dear life redeems you. And then the statue comes to life. Our faith that Paulina has asked us to awake is answered. It is turned into a dramatic spirituality, a live event. In the context of the story, the moment and the music that we hear are truly magical. If we did not know the play, the coming to life of the statue would be as great a miracle for us as for the characters watching it on stage. Shakespeare's coup de théâtre achieves its impact partly through the actress playing Hermione having to remain totally still for around 85 lines, which is about 5 minutes of stage time. It's a physical challenge that seems almost unachievable by any actor, and yet it is achievable because I've seen it done and I've seen it achieved many times, but I've also seen it not work. And yet, but that's what Shakespeare demands. So a lot depends on the pose you adopt if you're trying to be still for 5 minutes and not blink even. A good one, two really good ones I've seen. One was Claire Higgins. She played Hermione at the National Theatre in 2001. Alex Jennings was Leontes, and she was a Little Mermaid, Hermione. That was a really sensible pose for Anne Hermione, because you can be there as still as you like for as long as you like. Another really good one was Alex Gilbraith for Greg Doran in 98-99 in the Royal Shakespeare Theatre. And she was in among some votive candles, and she was dressed like the Virgin Mary, and her head was down. Actually, people on the screen can't see this. You wouldn't have seen the Little Mermaid anyway because I was on the floor doing it. But this is Alex Gilbraith as a Virgin Mary in these votive candles. And because the candles were flickering, it sort of looked as though there was some life going on over her anyway. So that was a really good alibi, if there was any movement. It might have just been the candle flames flickering. It's a good one. Kelly Hunter, when she played the part again in Stratford, she actually lowered her heart rate. You know, she was a long time in the wings, because Hermione's dead at the end of Act 3, so you've got all of Act 4, which is a very long act. It's the longest act in all of Shakespeare. So you've got plenty of time to lower your heart rate in order to be so still. And she actually took a very difficult pose. And she came on stage and she was standing like this. I thought, Kelly, there's no way you're not going to move. She was like this. And I swear she did not move. And I looked and looked and looked, and I thought, are those fake arms? How can you be so still? But she managed it because of this lowering the heart rate. So this is the physical demand of Shakespeare, as well as the intellectual and emotional demands. This is why he's worth it, right? Husband and wife are reunited after 16 years. This is an astonishing moment in all of drama. They're reunited after 16 years. He thinks she's died. She obviously has been 16 years also thinking about what's it going to be like if ever I get reunited to Leontes. Leontes reaches out to Hermione, who's just come to life, in amazement and touches her and has the line, "Oh, she's warm." And it's like an example of Shakespeare's language being at its most simple and direct in the most profound human moment. Oh, she's warm. The touch he has longed for is given back to him, and the first thing he notices is the shock of her flesh and blood reality. The emotions of both husband and wife are too powerful for Shakespeare to put into words. Instead, we hear the observations of two onlookers. She embraces him. She hangs about his neck. As Shakespeare dramatises what it means for two human beings to start to experience forgiveness. And then a daughter who was supposed dead is given back to her mother, who blesses her. Hermione's only words in the scene is a blessing on Perdita. You gods look down, and from your sacred vials pour your blessings upon my daughter's head. Husband and wife may still have a lot of talking to do, but the possibility of reconciliation and mutual forgiveness has been opened up, and the effect on the audience can be deeply moving. This is why it's a lot of Shakespearean's favourite play, The Winter's Tale. When Adrian Noble, the former artistic director of the Royal Shakespeare Company, used to be asked, "What's your favourite Shakespeare play?" he would often reply, "You mean After the Winter's Tale?" And as the actors came onto the stage for their curtain call, at the end of Gregory Doran's 1998 production for the Royal Shakespeare Company, when I mentioned Alex Kilbrave, Anthony Sher, the late great Sir Anthony Sher, was Leontes, and a very marvellous Leontes he was. A woman sitting next to me turned to me with tears in her eyes, and she said, "She was alive for 16 years, and nobody knew." That's amazing. That means that Shakespeare's coup de théâtre can work every night this play is performed if you do it well enough. And a little while later, as the theatre was emptying, I saw a friend and Shakespeare scholar staggering up the aisle towards me with tears in his eyes too. And he grabbed my arm and he said, "You can keep your Hamlets, you can keep your Othellos, give me the Winter's Tale." That's how people can feel about the Winter's Tale. For many, it's the most genuinely moving of all of Shakespeare's works, and yet Shakespeare brings families together in other plays too, the Comedy of Errors, Pericles, for example. Perhaps part of what makes it moving is its tangible, incarnational sense of spirituality that brings together human lives and memories and hopes, as the faith which is required is enfleshed and enacted before us. It's worth noting too that in Shakespeare's source story for The Winter's Tale, the Leontes figure, Pandosto, kills himself, and there is no reunion and no forgiveness occurs. So these are Shakespeare's inventions. But even though Shakespeare's artistic project is different, the forgiveness he portrays comes at a cost. Prince Mamilius and the courtier Antigonus, who was eaten by the bear, remain dead. Leontes' mention of this wide gap of time in the play's penultimate line acknowledges the pain as well as the love that he has caused and experienced. But he is forgiven, and that is the wonder of this Winter's Tale. I just want to remember, and you may have seen it broadcast because it was in the last couple of months, from the Royal Opera House, the Royal Ballet, the Sylfield's new ballet of The Winter's Tale. Did any of you see that?
Yes.
Did you see it? Wasn't it marvellous? And how you danced jealousy. And I liked everything about it, the music, the design, the dancing, the way they told the story. But it was the only time I'd seen it when there are two statues in the final scene. There's a statue of the dead prince and a statue of the dead queen. But only the queen comes to life. So it's a great way of remembering the dead prince at the same time, and the hurt that the loss of Mamilius, the heir to the kingdom, has caused Leontes and Hermione and the kingdom and the brother that Perdita never knew. And reminds us that the kingdoms will come together through Perdita and Prince Florizel. They are it. They are the daughter of Leontes and the son of Polixenes, who, fell out and parted for 16 years. They're part of the reunion, so that the kingdoms are brought together as well. So it was an astonishing play, The Winter's Tale. So to engage with Shakespeare from a spiritual perspective means no less than to try and engage our own imagined feelings and readings and imaginations with his. There we find an incarnational imagination rooted in the particularity of human experience and crises, one which knows what it is to bless and to seek blessing, what forgiveness is, and one which is not afraid to ask the searching and difficult questions of our existence that are common to us all. And that's all I'm going to say for the time being. Thank you for listening. And thank you for joining us, people online. I hope you've enjoyed the talks, and I hope you come back to the Oxford Centre for Spiritual Growth. But we can have some questions.